The 1968 Summer Olympics, in Spanish, Los Juegos Olímpicos de Verano de 1968, officially known as the Games of the 24th Olympiad, was an international multi-sport event held in Mexico City, Mexico, from October the 12th to 27th, 1968. The athletes numbered 5,516, of whom 4,735 were men and 781 were women. 112 countries participated in those Olympics. The events include 172 in 18 sports or 24 disciplines. They were opened by the Mexican president Gustavo Díaz Ordaz. The Olympic cauldron was carried to the Olympic torch was carried to the stadium by Enriqueta Basilio. And the stadium was Estadio Olímpico Universitario. They were the first Olympic Games to be staged in Latin America. The Rio de Janeiro Olympics in 2016 have been the second one. And the first to be staged in a Spanish-speaking country. They were also the first games to use an all-weather, smooth track for track and field events instead of the traditional cinder track, because one of the problems of the cinder track, of course, was that in rainy weather, especially if the rain continued for many hours, the track became very muddy and wet and very uncomfortable to run on. The 1968 Games were the third to be held in the last quarter of the year, after the 1956 Games in Melbourne, Australia, and the 1964 Games in Tokyo, Japan. The Mexican student movement of 1968 happened concurrently, and the Olympic Games were correlated to the government's repression. Mexico had had since 1928 or 1929 essentially a one-party dominant regime, the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, or the Institutional Revolutionary Party, had basically monopolized political power, especially at the federal level. It always won, according to the official results, the presidential elections, but also the congressional elections and most of the state and municipal elections as well. In October 1963, Mexico City was selected as the venue for the 1968 Summer Olympics, ahead of Detroit, Michigan, United States, Buenos Aires, Argentina, and Lyon, France. Highlights included the following. In the medal award ceremony for the men's 200-meter dash, African-American athletes Tommie Smith, who won the gold medal, and John Carlos, who took the bronze medal, took a stand for civil rights by raising their black gloved fists and wearing black socks in lieu of shoes. The Australian Peter Norman, who had run second, wore an American civil rights badge as support to them on the podium, although he was otherwise normally dressed. The International Olympic Committee decided to punish Tommie Smith and John Carlos, and they banned those two sprinters from the Olympic Games for life. Norman was left off Australia's Olympic team in 1972. American and future professional world champion George Foreman won the gold medal for boxing in the heavyweight decision. He waved a small American flag as he bowed to the crowd. The high elevation of Mexico City at 2,240 meters, or 7,350 feet above sea level, influenced many of the events, particularly in track and field. No other Summer Olympic Games before or since have been held at high elevation. Although a performance reducer for endurance athletes such as long-distance runners, the thin air contributed to many record-setting jumps, leaps, vaults, and throws, as well as all of the men's sprints of 400 meters and less. As a reminder of this fact, one of the promotional articles of these Olympics was a small metallic box labeled Aire de Mexico, or Air of Mexico, that was Especial para batir records, special for breaking records. For the first time, East and West Germany competed as separate teams after being forced by the International Olympic Committee to compete as a combined German team in 1956, 1960 and 1964. The German-Austrian composer Ludwig van Beethoven's Ode to Joy was played when East and West Germany arrived in the stadium. Al Oerter of the United States won his fourth consecutive gold medal in the men's discus to become the only the second athlete to achieve this feat in an individual event, and the first in track and field, or athletics. Bob Beamon of the United States leaped 8.90 meters or 29.2 feet in the long jump, an incredible 55 centimeter or 22-inch improvement over the previous world record. US athlete Mike Powell finally broke the world record in 1991 at the 1991 World Track and Field Championships in Tokyo, Japan. In the triple jump, the previous world record was improved 5 times by 3 different athletes. Mr. Viktor Saneyev of the Soviet Union won the first of 3 successive gold medals in this event, and then in 1980, in the twilight of his career, he finished second at the Moscow Summer Olympics. Dick Fosbury of the United States won the gold medal in men's high jump by using his unconventional Fosbury flop technique, which quickly became the dominant technique in the event. Miss Věra Čáslavská of Czechoslovakia won 4 gold medals in gymnastics and protested the Soviet invasion earlier that year of her country. Debbie Meyer of the United States became the first swimmer to win 3 individual gold medals in women's 200 meter, 400 meter and 800 meter freestyle events. Meyer was then only 16 years old. American swimmer Charlie Hickox won 3 gold medals, 200 meter intermediate maybe, 400 meter intermediate, or medley maybe, yeah. Individual medley, 400 meter individual medley and 4x100 meter medley relay, and won silver medal 100 meter backstroke. The introduction of doping tests resulted in the first disqualification because of doping. Swedish pentathlete Mr. Hans-Gunnar Liljenvall was disqualified for alcohol use. He had drunk several bottles of beer, or mugs of beer, or cups of beer just prior to competing. John Stephen Akwari of Tanzania in Eastern Africa became internationally famous after finishing the marathon in the last place despite a dislocated knee. This was the first of 3 Olympic participations by Jacques Roget. He competed in yachting and would later become the president of the International Olympic Committee. Let's see about the pronunciation. Yeah, Jacques Roget, or in Dutch, Jacques Roget, a Belgian sports administrator and physician. Miss Norma Enriqueta Basilio de Sotelo of Mexico became the first woman to light the Olympic cauldron with the Olympic flame. The 1968 Summer Olympics were the first games at which there was a significant African presence in men's distance running. Africans won at least 1 medal in all running events from 800 meters to the marathon, and in so doing they set a trend for future games. Most of these runners came from high altitude areas of countries like Kenya and Ethiopia, and they were well prepared for the 2,240-meter elevation of Mexico City. Kipchoge Keino of Kenya won the 1,500-meter run, took the silver medal in the 5,000-meter run, and then was listed as not having completed the race in the 10,000-meter run because he had collapsed from pain with about 2 laps to go. The 1968 Summer Olympics were the first Olympic Games where the closing ceremony was transmitted in color to the world as well as the events themselves. South Africa was provisionally invited to the Olympic Games on the understanding that all segregation and discrimination in sport would be eliminated by the 1972 Summer Olympics. However, African countries and African American athletes promised to boycott the Games if South Africa was present, and Eastern Bloc countries threatened to do likewise. In April 1968, the International Olympic Committee conceded that it would be most unwise for South Africa to participate. The apartheid system, whereby all South African residents were classified, some of them arbitrarily, as either whites, blacks, coloreds, or Indians, was not fully dismantled until 1994, when the first multiracial democratic elections were held in South Africa, followed by the institution of an African National Congress-led government under President Nelson Mandela. Responding to growing social unrest and protests, the Mexican federal government had increased economic and political suppression against especially labor unions in the decade building up to the Olympics. A series of protest marches in the city in August 1968 gathered significant attendance, with an estimated 500,000 taking part on August the 27th. President Gustavo Diaz Ordaz ordered the occupation of the National Autonomous University of Mexico in September, but protests continued. Using the prominence brought by the Olympics, students gathered in the Plaza de las Tres Culturas, or the Square of Three Cultures, in Tlatelolco to call for greater civic and democratic rights, and showed disdain for the Olympics with slogans such as "No queremos Olimpiadas, queremos revolución." We don't want Olympics, we want revolution. 10 days before the Olympics started, the Mexican federal government ordered the gathering in Plaza de las Tres Culturas to be broken up. Some 5,000 soldiers and 200 tankettes, or small tanks, surrounded the plaza. Hundreds of protesters and civilians were killed, and over 1,000 were arrested. At the time, the state-controlled Mexican mass media portrayed the event as the military suppression of a violent student uprising, but later analysis indicates that the gathering was peaceful prior to the army's advance.